Second baseman Dave Cash, shortstop Larry Bowen, third baseman Mike Schmidt, left fielder Greg Luzinski, center fielder Gary Maddox.
Phillies fever. Phillies fever. Phillies fever.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk Podcast. We led into the show today with a song that is 41 years old, and that, of course, Phillies Fever, debuted back in 1976. A few of the hot Phillies at the time, Mike Schmidt, Dave Cash, Larry Bowa, Greg Luzinski, all in on that song, and just brought you back to the mid-70s there. They have a nice disco beat to it, and wow, wouldn't it be nice to finish like the 1976 Phillies did so well that year? They went on to do great things. They didn't win the World Series, but they really had a heck of a season. The Phils winning 101 games back in 76, the bicentennial year in Philadelphia, managed by Danny Ozark. And they really ran the table almost like the Cubs did last year. First half, they ran 56 wins and 25 losses. They didn't do as well in the second half, or they might have won 110 games. They finished up in the second half 45 and 36. Great way to open the show, and wow, isn't it great to have baseball back on the diamond down there in Clearwater, Florida for the Phillies. They had a big win today, and they're 2-2 now. And it's great to see different players getting a chance on the field. That's what you're going to see in the first few weeks of spring training, maybe a guy or two to impress you. Brock Stassi has so far impressed the Phillies a little bit. He had a home run the other night, and a couple others are impressing the Phillies as well. Phillies coaching staff, there's a walk-on that really impressed the Phillies staff today, and his name is Scott Kingery. He's a second baseman, turns 23 in April, a Phillies second-round pick in the 2015 draft. Former walk-on at the University of Arizona. He really blossomed into a great player his junior year, batting .392. He took the Pac-10 batting champs title there, batting .392. And he played a huge part in today's win, the Phillies' 7-5 win over the Baltimore Orioles. So maybe you'll see and hear of Scott Kingery this year, especially if Cesar Hernandez comes down with an injury. But don't know that position is up for grabs so far in spring training. That's another interesting thing that happens in spring training. A lot of the time, some players are playing for a position. But so far, the Phillies look like they're pretty deep in the positions that they have filled already. Things can change. I mean, if Kingery were to go on a big run and Hernandez was very quiet through spring, something like that may happen, but just an interesting thing to keep your eyes on during the spring training. Another guy who's completely on fire for the spring training so far, Michael Franco, came into today's ball game batting .800 the last day of February. Has a couple home runs and a few RBIs, so I hope he saves some of this for the regular season when it starts up in just 34 more days till opening day. Kind of hard to believe that we're down to almost a month. And as the month of March opens up, which is just a day away from the time I'm doing this podcast, it's going to be a little more interesting as spring training goes on. I would say the last 2.5 weeks of spring training should be very interesting. A lot of the regulars playing more. Some of the guys that won't get a chance to play with the team when it goes north will be going back to the minors and places like that. But it's a wonderful time to catch a ball game down there in Clearwater. And, of course, if you can't, you can always watch the games on television here in the Philadelphia area on Comcast Sportsnet. And they have a lot of games on spring training being broadcast. If many of our listeners are a little bit older, You never saw spring training games years ago. You had to read about it in the paper the next day. Spring training was very much a mystery unless you were down there most of the time, just about 30 years ago or so. It was just, the world was so much different. There was no instant messages, no social media, things like that. Everything was a lot more, information was a lot more harder to get, I'll say that much. So far, the Phillies look pretty good for spring training. They went out and splashed some money on some free agents. Now, those guys are only going to be here for the season unless they make a great impression on the Phillies and the Phils happen to offer some big money for them to stay. But, of course, Clay Buchholz making $13.5 million this year. Michael Saunders, they got him from the Blue Jays, and I hope he really pays some dividends for the Phillies this year. I'm not so sure he's a guy that's worth $9 million a year, but that's what the Phils are paying him. Pat Neshek out in the bullpen, he's going to be getting $6.5 million, 1-year deal again, and Joaquin Benoit, $7.5 million. So the Phillies have solidified their pitching. They went out and spent some money on the bullpen. Of course, we had a couple seasons where the bullpen was basically AA style bullpen out there, and it kind of showed a lot of the time. So maybe with this combination now, we're going to see a better bridge to the closer, and maybe the Phillies can hold some of those leads that they did not just a season ago or two. So I'm expecting good things for the Phillies. I think they're going to finish above 500, just a building block to something better for them. I'm not so much sure they'll be 10 or 12 games over 500, but certainly above 500 with this kind of lineup. They do have some players that they went out and got that should make a difference on the field. A couple publications giving the Phillies kudos on their off-season acquisitions. Sports Illustrated and Fox Sports, I believe, gave the Phillies an A- grade on how they went out and got some players. So, the Phillies season for 2017 is right around the corner. It's going to be very entertaining, to say the least. And I hope they do a whole lot better, because the Phillies offense last year, as was said on this podcast many times and in the blog over at fightingphillies.com, was something that needed a lot of work. And I think with Saunders out in right field, maybe platooning at times with Altair, and that's another thing. Aaron Altair is a man without a position almost on this team going into spring training. And I thought the Phillies would really be keen on building around him. He's a younger player. Seems like he's got a lot of power and speed. And I still think they will build around him, platooning him this season between right field and possibly left field at times. And if there is an injury, I think he could step in and fill the shoes. So we'll have to see what happens with Aaron Altair. There's a lot of other players with a spotlight on them. And I'm going to just take a minute's break here. We're going to hear a commercial from baseballtalkradio.com, a couple great shows on there, and we'll be back on the other side with some more Phillies Talk Podcast.
Hi, this is Farley.
And Mark from Baseball PhD.
Thanks for listening to BaseballPodcast.net.
Up next, another great episode of Phillies Talk.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You're listening to Fighting Phillies Talk Podcast.
Brewtown Sports is your source for Brewers news and notes. Join Mr. Brewtown as he keeps you up to date on all the happenings of your Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Follow the show on Facebook and Twitter, Brewtown Sports. Listen 24/7 at brewtownsports.podomatic.com.
Hi, this is Gary Mack of Mets Musings, and you're listening to my good friend Rich Baxter on Phillies Talk, right here on BaseballTalkRadio.com, the home of great baseball talk shows.
Thank you, the great Gary Mack there from the Mets Musings podcast. And hey, did you know me and Gary actually do a show together talking baseball each week? We wrap up the news and talk all about the most recent happenings in baseball. The show is called the Baseball Talk Radio Show, and you can find that right at baseballpodcasts.net and, of course, baseballtalkradio.com, which is one and the same site. We even have a YouTube page if you want to check out the video version of the show. And we have a Patreon page as well over at Patreon, that's patreon.com/baseball talk. You can become a sponsor of that show. And it's really a show I love doing on a weekly basis. We get together around the weekend and just talk some baseball, what's been happening, recent news. We do some interviews. We had a couple authors on in the last few months in the off season. So check it out. It's the Baseball Talk Radio Podcast, Baseball Talk Radio Show with Gary Mack and yours truly. And there's a ton of other great baseball talk shows. I could literally sit around for hours and listen to the different podcasts. You have a few Cubs podcasts on that network. And I kind of know it well because I made it up myself. I designed the website and invited a lot of the shows on there. So check it out, baseballtalkradio.com. It's the home of great baseball talk shows. Well, back talking more Phillies now. And, wow, only 34 days till opening day. And the Phillies have a lot of work to do. Seems like all fun and games at spring training when you see the shots from Florida and Arizona, the guys laughing and having fun. But I'm sure there's a lot of competitiveness down there as well around this time. You know, some of these younger guys especially trying to make the team, trying to make an impact on the coaches and let them know that they're in this game to play and win too. So good competitive nature. Spring training, always a great time of year. Well, as I was saying, you can follow the podcast and all the shows that I do on YouTube as well. There's an audio version of the Fightin' Phillies podcast called Phillies Talk Podcast. And there's also this audio version, which you can find at phillies.libsyn, that's LIBSYN.com. That's the home of the podcast, where you can check out all the audio shows. And, of course, over at the blog at fightinphillies.com, you can check out some writing that I do on a daily basis during the season, a couple times a week, and also some other fun things. So check it out. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. On Twitter, of course, we're at Fightin' Phillies. And also there is a Facebook page for the blog as well. So I invite you to check it out all on social media this year. If you're a Phillies fan, I appreciate you following and say hello, drop me a line or two. Tell me what you think about this team. I love to hear fans' discussions on the team. You know, the fans sort of create a buzz around a team sometimes, and it starts small sometimes with certain groups of fans, and then they get others into it. So it's always a great thing to read and take part in, especially over at the blog at fightinphillies.com. Well, a little shortened version of the podcast for this week. But before we close it out, and it's so great to have baseball back, by the way. Did I say that already? I think I did. But talking about one recent player that the Phillies added onto the team, he's got a lot of charisma around him. That, of course, is Chris Coghlan from the world champion Chicago Cubs. He's been one of the Phillies that I think probably will do the most good for this team. He's sort of a team leader in spirit. He's a very spiritual person, a religious type of person, that is. And it seems like he can play some ball still. I think he's got a couple years left in him. I'll be very happy to see Chris Coghlan in the Phillies uniform. I always kind of thought the Phillies were going to get Coghlan at some time, especially years ago when he played for the Marlins. The Phillies were scouting him back then, but his stock was a lot higher then. Of course, he was Rookie of the Year when he broke into the league, and then it sort of went downhill for him. He became sort of a utility player in the last couple of years. But it'd be interesting to see how Chris Coghlan adds to this Phillies team as the 2017 season starts up. Well, it's a great time to be a baseball fan. I know everybody's so happy. I've seen everybody out there in their Phillies caps and their Phillies shirts and jackets and all kinds of stuff. Of course, we've had some spring-like weather in the Philadelphia area in the last couple of weeks. It was 70 degrees today. It's been in the high 60s a couple days last week. And I think they said there might be some snow on the weekend coming, though. But, this has been a great February as far as weather in the Philadelphia area. Almost feel like you're down in Florida on some days. Not quite, but close enough. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Phillies Talk. We're going to lead out with a little bit more of that song from 41 years ago, Phillies Fever, because I think a lot of people around the area sort of have it again, that feeling of baseball and great weather, and just got to call it Phillies Fever.
Breaker 19 for some local info.
Go ahead, local info.
Hey, good buddy, can you tell me what the hottest thing in Philadelphia is?
Got to be the Phillies, good buddy.
That's a big 10-4. Is that you, Dave?
That's me, Gary. 10-4. Say, Greg, you going out for batting practice?
Yeah, Dave. As soon as I finish these 3 cheeseburgers.
Phillies Fever.